Hey gaming fans, so today's another Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile, and this one is Deck Out, or Empty Jar as it otherwise known as. So this is all about emptying your opponent's deck of cards. And of course in Yu-Gi-Oh! If that happens and your opponent can't draw, you win the game. That's what I like about card games like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! And stuff, where you get to build a variety of decks that do a variety of different things, not always just attack. But anyways, let's get to the deck profile. So obviously we have the MVP of the deck, Morphing Jar. Too bad this guy's only at 1, but I mean, I guess there's reasons for that. But anyways, so when he flips up, both you and your opponent discard your hands and draw 5 new cards. Sometimes your opponent might be happy about that, but once they realize what you're trying to do, they might not. But this is your star of the deck. This is what you want to get out on the field as fast as possible, and you want to flip him up and down as many times as you can. So the next is fresh off the ban list, well, I think it was fresh off the ban list, maybe 2 ban lists ago, Morphing Jar number 2. So this one is, it can backfire and it can do a good job, so it's really hard to say. But really what this does is it shuffles the monsters on the field back into the decks, and then each player reveals cards until they hit the same number of monsters that were shuffled in, and then special summon those to the field if they can, face down. So, it can, and then everything else goes to the graveyard. So, depending on your opponent's deck, if they don't run a whole lot of monsters, you could take a huge chunk out of their deck. Also, you'll get rid of any troublesome monsters you might not want to see. So, the next is Needleworm, sort of like the jar, except you don't get to draw anything, but this takes 5 cards right off their deck. So another card that you could technically, pull out and just constantly flip up and down, and then, eliminate as many cards as possible from your opponent's deck. Then I put in 2 of the Hyros, I think it's pronounced Hyros Shadow Scout. Sort of like the jar, but it's only for your opponent, and they draw 3 cards. I'm not too crazy about this one, but because we only have 1 Morphing Jar, there's not many other options that I could find, but pretty much they draw 3 cards, and then any spell cards, even though it says Magic there, but these are old cards, any spell cards that are revealed go right to the graveyard, and then any of the monsters go into their hand. So it could be good and it could be bad, but you're still getting 3 cards off their deck. And so that's it primarily for the flip effects. Now for the support cards. So we got 3 Spirit of the Fall Winds. This is a great card because it essentially helps get to your Morphing Jar faster. So if you don't draw it in turn 1, at least you have this. In the past, I used to use cards like Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest. You could use those as well. You can set it and just let it get it destroyed. It might even be a better option than this. I just figured that this might be faster. You normal summon it and then you get the card to your hand. But either way, so basically you normal summon that, you get to add a flip monster from your deck to your hand. You'll probably grab Morphing Jar. It is an 1800 body, so it might help to get rid of some troublesome monsters off the field. Then I threw in 1 Electromagnetic Turtle because you can end the battle phase, and you can only play 1, well, you could play 3, but you can only use this effect once per duel, so there's really no point in adding more than 1 unless you really want to make sure you pull his effect off. But during your opponent's battle phase, you basically banish them from your graveyard, and you end the battle phase, so at least keeps you alive for 1 full turn. Then, for the last of the monsters, AD Changers. So when this is in the graveyard, you can banish it to change the battle position of a monster. So, for instance, if your Morphing Jar is face down, if you set it, and this guy's in your graveyard, you could banish him to change him to face-up attack position, which will get as a flip effect off. And that's what you really want to do in this deck. You want to continuously flip up and flip down certain cards to mill out your opponent's deck. And that's it for the monsters. So, like I said, you got to be careful with Morphing Jar number 2, because if you have a lot of monsters yourself on the field, this isn't a very monster-heavy deck, so you might end up doing a little damage to yourself. So on to the spells. So we have 2 Book of Moon. I was debating on this one to have it at 3, but I think 2 might be good enough. Essentially what it does, you just target a monster on the field and change it to face-down defense position. Again, always wanting to get your Morphing Jar, so if you flip them up, you activate its effect. Then you could use a Book of Moon to flip them down, and then, you know, maybe use an AD changer or something to flip them back up again, and there's another 10 cards. So, you know, you want to do that. Also, in a pinch, it can serve as a defense card. So if your opponent attacks with something, he's going to go for game or whatever, or perhaps he's going to synchro summon into something, you could Book of Moon a target and save your butt for one turn. And 3 of the Book of Eclipse, which is essentially a better version of the Book of Moon, because it does change all monsters on the field to face down defense position. And of course, it also works that it, at the end of the turn, all those monsters flip up, and then your opponent draws cards equal to the number of cards they flipped up. So, I mean, I know it's not going to work with Link monsters. That's going to be a problem if you're playing against a deck that's heavy on Link monsters. You know, you might be able to disrupt their play by turning some of them face down so they can't use them before they turn into Link monsters, but, you know, that's what we got to deal with. Then, for another way to flip your monsters up, is 3 Book of Taiyu. So this is basically you flip a face down monster on the field into face up attack position. So the good thing about this is turn 1, if you have this guy in your hand and a Book of Taiyu, you set your morphing jar, activate your Book of Taiyu, he flips up into attack mode, and then you get to draw the cards and start milling your opponent's deck right away. And of course, we can't have a deck out deck without card destruction. So when your opponent has a nice big hand, especially after a morphing jar play, you get to, you know, discard that hand, and then they have to draw the same number of cards. So another 5 cards possibly off their deck. Just for a little bit of draw power, and again, a little bit of deck thinning for both players, and that's hand destruction. So each player sends 2 cards from their hand to the graveyard to draw 2 cards. So the good thing about this deck is it's constantly getting your opponent to draw cards, so there's a good chance they will have the targets in their hand to use that. And kind of like your Monster Reborn of the deck, there's the Shallow Grave. So each player selects 1 monster card in their respective graveyard and special summon them in face down defense position. So if you're activating your morphing jar a lot, you're probably going to get some Needleworms in the graveyard. So now you can Shallow Grave them into the field and then flip them up. And of course, 1 Day of Peace. Now this deck was obviously a lot better back when 1 Day of Peace was at 3, because that would be, you know, potentially 3 turns are going to survive. So unfortunately, and it helps because it draws a card off your opponent's deck. But unfortunately, we only have 1, so we're only going to work with 1. And that's it for the spells. On to the traps. So this deck, you need to stay alive. So 3 Threatening Roar. So I figure between the 1 Day of Peace, the Threatening Roars, and your turtle, your electromagnetic turtle, wherever he went, there's quite a few ways of you to stay alive during your opponent's turn. And hopefully, you know, you can handle some attacks, if anything, to, you know, go on to the next turn. Because this isn't a 1-turn kill deck by far. I mean, you could do a lot of deck damage in 1 turn, but you definitely need to play a few rounds of this. The next one is Recall. This is kind of your out to things like Ash Blossom or any kind of hand traps that might really foil your play. And the good thing about this is, so when your opponent activates a monster effect, your opponent draws 1 card, and then you negate the activation and then destroy the card. So again, you're getting them to draw another card. So, because you know this can get Ash Blossomed or whatever, and it might ruin your day. So. And if you have Called by the Graves, I don't have any Called by the Graves myself, but you might want to consider them, or at least side deck them if you're going to go into a tournament. The next one is side effects. Your opponent draws 1 to 3 cards, and then you gain 2,000 life points each for each card they draw. So it's really a gamble on your opponent's side. I mean, if they draw 3 cards, you're getting 6,000 life points, which will make it a little bit harder for them to kill you. But also, they're going to get 3 cards in their hand, 3 cards deeper into their deck. So a skilled player would probably not draw the 3 cards. They might draw 1 or 2, depending on what they know you're up to. And of course, after that effect, you're going to want to activate this present card. Unfortunately, it's only once per turn, but that's fine. Your opponent discards their entire hand and then draws 5 cards. And this is the card, you know, once I found out this card existed, This is why I wanted to rebuild this deck, because this works brilliantly with the rest of the deck, in that you always want them to have cards in their hand, especially with side effects. If they were to choose 3 and say they already had 5 in their hands, that's 8 cards. So, you know, activating present card, they're going to discard 8 cards and then draw another 5. So that's going to, you know, really hurt them. And, you know, of course you can only activate it once per turn, but that's fine. You activate one, you have the other one set for the next turn. Anyways, yeah, that's the deck. I know these decks can be annoying for some people, and they're not, you know, they're not impossible to beat. Obviously, if your opponent gets a good hand and gets a good monster field out, but it's good that we actually have the Morphing Jar number 2, which can actually help deal with big monster fields and kind of leave your opponent in a kind of a pickle. Anyways, yeah, that's the deck. Let me know what you think, what cards you like. Again, you could sub out certain cards, like you don't need the Spirit of Fall Wind. You can go with Sandgens or any other searchers for that matter, or maybe have them and the Sandgens just to make sure you get into them. But then you have to eliminate something else. Anyways, hope you like the deck. Let me know what you think. Throw some comments down below. I always like to hear what you have to say. Hope you subscribe. Talk to you later.